and welcome back to another Coffee and Heroes podcast as we go now with another creator interview. And for the second time in as many recordings, we're fortunate to be welcoming back a friend of the podcast after entirely too long away from us. As was the case last time, there's a bit of toing and froing to make this happen, and in that time, today's guest has been closer to us, then far away, and then a little bit closer again. Our guest has worked across journalism, TV, and movies, and in our spheres is best known for his work on Kill Shakespeare, Assassin's Creed, and of course, the fantastic 2021 young adult series from Boom, The Last Witch, a series that both Keith and myself were huge fans of. Last time we spoke was back in the September of 2021, almost 4 years ago, and the tail end of lockdown, which was after The Last Witch came out before the trade paperback landed, and it was episode 156 for us. And we're welcoming him back 4 years later and 122 episodes later. As we say, it's been quite too long. And damn straight, we're not letting him release a sequel to his dark Irish fantasy series without talking to the Irish comic book podcast, brackets, Keith said that, about it. So it's our great pleasure to welcome back a friend of the pod and great hang, Conor McCreery.
Thank you very much. 279, baby, or 278, depending on how you're doing the math. I'm almost at 28. That's
I guess we'll call it 280. We'll call it 280.
yeah, which will be my weight after all the baguettes and butter.
How have you been, sir? What have you been up to? How has your life changed in the last 4 years?
I mean, it has certainly changed from the lockdown days of COVID. Right now, I'm talking to you guys actually from France. I am a Canadian, born and bred, but about a year ago, my wife and I and our three kids moved to a little town in France called Annecy to have a bit of a family adventure for 2 or 3 years. And so yeah, so I am talking to you in the almost the shadow of the Alps.
Wow, that's fantastic. And you have moved about a bit lately, if I recall.
Yes.
You've actually been over on the island of Ireland since
I
then. We
was,
didn't
yes.
see
I so
you.
I've still got a lot of family. So we were in Ireland. We have family in Dublin. We have family outside of Tip. We actually watched a hurling match between Tip and Kilkenny, which was great. I appreciated my two sons, who are complete mercenaries, deciding to change who they were cheering for depending on what the score was at any given moment. And thankfully, Ireland is one of the kind of places where you can do that and nobody wants to do you harm, right? You try that in like Philadelphia or New York or something. You're a Yankees fan, then you're a Red Sox fan. Like you might not get out alive. But Ireland, they just kind of looked down and tutted them if they were cheering for, the wrong colors. But yeah, we traveled around. We went to the Blarney Stones. Like
Uh-huh.
we did that. We did that classic chestnut. And yeah, we wandered around, saw some family, ate some wonderful food, and really it was the first time I'd been able to get my kids introduced to their heritage. My dad, who recently passed away about a year and a half ago, had always wanted to take them, and then life got in the way. So this
Hmm.
was kind of a chance for them to see where their grandfather came from and where
Wow.
his heritage was from, and it was really cool. You could see them kind of seeing how being Irish, like having or at least having an Irish passport, maybe not being Irish, but having an Irish passport and having that heritage, you can see it kind of clicking in terms of just how they already did have some Irish traits. It was really great. And of
Uh-huh.
course, we had the absolute classic Irish experience of asking somebody for directions and then ending up having a 30-minute chat with them where you found out everything about their life, including a recent tragedy, and basically gave the person a hug and walked off. And we're like, oh, I'm never going to see that guy again. But we just had this, so that to me is a quintessential Irish experience of just a great country filled with people who are just warm and generous. And yeah, it was great. I'm sorry we missed you guys when we were up there, but it was a wonderful trip. I hadn't
Yeah.
been for probably more than a decade, so it was great to be
Wow.
back.
Well, next time we will catch you the next time for sure, 100%. I mean, I had a slightly different experience. I was my wife is from Cork, and one of my best friends,
Hmm.
who Alan is very familiar with, Martin, is from Tip, and so Martin decided that he would like to invite myself and my good lady wife down to the pub to watch the hurling final on
Oh,
Sunday.
nice.
So where you say that you can do that and you can, have that sort of support one way or the other, I had to be very, very careful. It was a line that I was walking, so yeah. And then of course there was disappointment for my wife and triumph for my buddy
And I'm
there
sure
on
Martin was very quiet about that triumph.
it was
Did
well,
he at least offer your wife a conciliatory pint?
Yes, oh,
All right.
absolutely,
All right. Well,
100%,
then what more
100%.
can you
So,
do? What more
so
can you
yeah,
do?
that's great. But yeah, 100%. We were backing and forth on about whether or not we're going to have a chance to either meet up with you or talk with you whenever you're over here. It just didn't happen between well, largely because Alan was flat out busy. I was holidaying in North Africa, Morocco, which was fantastic. But next time, Connor, definitely next time. And as an aside, very, very sorry to hear about your dad.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah,
I
our
appreciate that.
condolences.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we'll certainly not delve into too much how you got started on comics, but you've crossed journalism and film and TV as well. Listeners can certainly go back on our podcast feed when we last spoke to you. We did a nice big deep dive into your background comics. But is it fair to say that you feel more established in the world of comics these days?
It's a funny question, Alan, because there ended up it's funny how comics work sometimes, right? It's like usually in the comics world, you tend to think of one of the really big benefits is the gap between when you come up with an idea and when it can actually be picked up and read by someone is compared certainly to film, much, much shorter. And I ended up running after we talked about The Last Witch. It ended up being this very weird stretch of my career where things were a go and then they weren't. Um, Projects took longer. Like The Last Witch was about 4.5 years between sort of that trade coming out and now the first issue of the second book coming out. That was a bizarre gap which I'd never experienced before. I was working on another project that's coming out actually in October, which we might talk a little bit about, called Fela, Music is the Weapon. And that was one where, I worked on that for like 6, 7 years, but I'd say about a year after we talked, that was the end of my work on that. And then there was another project, but that's not coming out for another year. So it's actually been this kind of weird space of working on stuff, now moving to promotion, having done some pitching, and then having had some things kind of you thought it was a go and then it wasn't. And so it's weird. In a weird way, I was saying to someone, I almost feel like I'm less solid than I would have been, right? Because then, we'd done, the Kill Shakespeare wasn't too far in the
Hmm.
rearview mirror. I just come off doing some stuff for Adventure Time and regular show and Assassin's Creed, and The Last Witch had come out. So there was this, for me, I had this real feeling of, oh, my second creator-owned series. And I've done some, some work for hire stuff, and then it felt like, even though it wasn't the truth, it felt like there was just this long gap. So it's interesting because now it's going to be, I'm talking about The Last Witch and Bela is going to come out, and then this other book will hopefully come out, maybe two next year. And so I'm sure at that point it'll feel like all the momentum's back in the world. But of course, that's also based on, I'm talking to publishers and doing more pitching. And so it's an interesting space. If you're lucky enough to be some of the biggest names where you've got a lot of places that are just like, hey, whatever your next idea is, we trust you, we know you, like we'll do it. Um, in some ways, I'm hoping that between The Last Witch and the next couple of projects that will push me closer to that because yeah, it is. I think that's probably the greatest frustration when you sit there and you're like, oh man, I've got a bunch of stuff and I wish I had more people at the editorial position who had worked with me and were like, oh yeah, if it's a good pitch, we know you can make it great.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's weird, Alan. It's funny. It can be a really humbling industry sometimes, and that's probably good. It's probably one of the reasons why most people in comics are actually pretty cool and not up their own ass.
Well, that's
I
certainly
mean,
our experience anytime we talk to any creators. I mean, it's such a wonderfully receptive industry and, having the access to creators. I mean, obviously as a store where they're almost in the front lines promoting your work and selling it and being a specialist store and so forth. But, I talk about it all the time to people. If you're working in music, you will never have access to the top level musicians for this kind of thing. If you're into movies, you'll never get to chat to movie stars. But, we're lucky enough to enjoy an industry so much that's wonderfully open with their time and as you say, not up their own arse in our experience.
Yeah, I mean, and looking at some of the names that have been in the 122 or so podcasts between when we last chatted. I mean, there's some, there are some names that you said are they're absolutely among the top names in the industry. And yeah, you're right. I mean, I think that's another reason why comics is such a really interesting medium to be a part of, but to be a fan of is you can get access to these people, and you really can listen, listening to your podcast, here's someone who's, an absolute star at his or her game and just be able to soak that in, which is, you're not going to get that from a Tom Cruise or Ron, like it just doesn't exist. So it is, but also credit to you guys for being the Comics podcast. That's right. I said it. I said it. There's
We
others
will,
out there, and I'm not saying you're bad. I'm just saying you're not the Irish Comics
we will be
podcast.
There we
editing that
go.
soundbite and using it everywhere possible.
And also, Connor, whenever you were, releasing The Last Witch, I mean, it was an odd time. It was that, sort of heart of the lockdown, sort of tail end of the lockdown, whenever the trade paperback came out, and that, I mean, that still having impacts, I think, even now on an awful lot of industries, not least the comic book industry. We're seeing it in movies and everything else. So don't minimize that as well. That
Oh,
was
for
something.
sure. Well, it was interesting because actually, like the COVID actually helped The Last Witch at first because there really was that push into, at least in North America, I can't speak on for the shops here, but like there was this push of people being like, I've got to have something to read. I'm in there. There's no more TV and film, right? Like there was a whole bunch of stuff. If you're waiting for your new series, new movie that wasn't coming out, comics were still getting made. They were still coming out, right? And so when the last Witch came out, it was setting records for Boombox, for sales records, for single issues, right? And it kind of was a perfect time. They'd just done Wind, James Tinian's book.
Yep.
And so that had kind of, because it was interesting because The Last Witch was never meant to be singles. It was meant to be originally one big graphic novel. And then a number of things happened and it became two graphic novels and then it became two sets of singles. Um, and so we ended up releasing The Last Witch, which we're doing for this one as well, in sort of all sorts of odd sizes. So, most of them were 40 plus pages. And Boom had found that, at least during COVID, certainly people were willing to spend a couple extra bucks to get, it was a good value for a reader, right? You weren't spending $9 to get twice as many pages. You were spending like $2 extra to get twice as many pages. And so, yeah, it worked really well for that, but it sucked for the bookstore release because the bookstores were handling things in a different way. And so The Last Witch did fantastically well in comic shops, and it really struggled to find its place in bookstores, which is, I think, one of the reasons why it took as long as it did for us to be able to come back and do another book, because there was a little bit, it was always intended to do it, but COVID kind of shook Boom a little bit. Obviously, like you said, the whole industry kind of was shook. There was a bit of Alan, better than anybody, the dip that kind of happened out. There was these great numbers, and it was like, wow, like a new era. And then, nope, things went back to where they were or worse. And so that was tricky for a lot of publishers of like, wait a second, how much can we believe any of these numbers? And so, yeah, it was interesting. It was definitely a good opportunity for me to see more of the business side of things and to see how that works. But thankfully at Boom, there were always champions for the book. And also the artist in the book, V. Glass, and the colorist, Natalia Nestorenko, were amazing because, when I kind of went to them and said, look, we don't really know what's up with book two, like when it's going to come out. It'll come out somewhere. I was like, look, I know it'll come out somewhere, but I'm not sure what we will, what the plan is 100%. And V and Natalia were both like, cool, well, we're going to draw it and color it because we love this story. It's amazing. We want it finished and we'll trust that you'll find a place for it. So even though we didn't have like a guarantee on our contract in place, they did it anyways. They like just did the book on faith, which is absolutely
That's
mind blowing.
mind-blowing,
And
yeah.
I can't say enough about just V and Natalia, how, I mean, incredible their work is, but just like as people, like you can imagine you feel this high of, oh, this book's coming out. And, people like you guys were saying, lots of people were really into it. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, it might not finish. And, I had a lot of people being like, why is this ending so weird? I don't understand. Like it was so good, but it was such a horrible ending, or there's more, isn't there? And then, people would reach out to me ever so often on social media, like, is this coming out? My kid was 6, now they're 11. They still want to read the second part of this book. Like, and I had to just, so I actually, don't tell Boom, but I sent out a few PDFs of the material before it was ever official to just be like, it's coming sometime, but
Just
I'll
to
send
prove
one
it
to you.
almost,
I'll
yeah.
send one to you and your kid right now because you took the time to reach out to me and your kid's this mega fan. Like, I will send you a copy. So there's a few
Yeah,
illegal PDFs floating
that's
around out there.
that's very interesting. I mean, I think we were that was one of the questions. I mean, I didn't think the ending was weird at all in terms of, obviously there was a cliffhangery aspect to it, but I mean, we also had the insight that, potentially there was more coming, but we'll certainly get to that. I'm very happy that I have all of my single issues of the original right here, so it's nice to see. In terms of yourself, what have you been reading and enjoying recently?
Oh, that's interesting. I've actually been reading a little bit more prose. I was reading actually, that's actually like right out here using one of my stands, but I was really reading Intermezzo by Sally Rooney,
Oh
a
yeah.
good Irish writer. That was not planned at all for this podcast, just happened to be.
Perfect
Um,
synchronicity.
yeah, seriously, right? I've been reading some BD, being in France. I mean, my French isn't very good, so I've been
Uh-huh.
either getting English translations or some simple, like, very simple French BD. There was an interesting one. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It is, World Without End. Got a little bit of a pop maybe last year. It's a comic that kind of talks about the use of energy, capitalism, like kind of tying together like the greater consumption. It's basically at its core is a less is more kind of sort of story,
Yes.
but it's
Uh-huh.
really, really interestingly illustrated, and it's got quite a good sense of humor. So it's one of those things where you're like, uh, in a different hand, it could feel like a very scolding message, but in the hands of the team who did it's actually kind of sprightly and fun. And then you close the book and are like, oh no, wait, no, now I'm depressed. But yeah, it's quite good. And I've been actually because I've been doing The Last Witch, but also I'm doing an all ages book for Scholastic, which will come out next year. And there's some talk about maybe doing more with them. I've been reading a lot. My daughter is just about to turn 12. My oldest son is 10. So I've been reading actually a lot of the graphic novels they bring home, kind
Uh-huh.
of getting another insight on the whole middle age or middle grade space.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then, yeah, I mean, I feel like that's kind of the major stuff. I was on a podcast and they gave me a great list of books I have to pick up. So that's kind of the next, once I get a couple of
Mm.
these things off, there's just a lot of stuff in the last year that I have to admit I am behind on. I mean, I haven't even
Yeah.
gone and seen the Superman movie yet, man.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
I
Yeah.
know.
It's
Do
listen,
you have a
you've had a lot
local
on.
do you have a local comic store over there or access to it? I know European comic stores tend to be a little bit
Yeah.
different how they are. They certainly when I went to Berlin, I checked out comic stores and they had a lot of sort of local material and a lot of maybe political material and sort of this small corner in the corner that was, American comics, so to speak. Do you have a store close to you that, you can get access to them?
So there actually are quite a few Bay Day stores here. So Annecy, where I'm in, is also the home of the world's biggest animation festival. So
Hmm.
you actually have like even for France, you have a pretty big audience of people who are very much into animation, comics, that type of storytelling. But most of them, because the French comics industry is so big, there are not a lot of American comic sections, or if there
Hmm.
are, they're big, but they're all translated because France is one of those markets where it's like, oh, if I translate an X-Men or
Hmm.
whatever it might, uh, pick your favorite image book, right? Like it's
Yeah.
going to sell here. So there definitely is. There's one place though where I've gone a few places, and we've talked about once the second trade of The Last Witch is out, he wants to do more English language comics. So there's been some talk about, oh, maybe I'll help.
Oh.
We'll help kick it off. I'll be the local North American comics creator who comes in and signs some books and I hope my French will be, well, I'm committing to myself that my French will be appreciably better by that point. So I'll be able to carry on a few more conversations. But if not, I'll have my assistants, my children, who actually most times when I get into a French conversation and start to get lost, do this. And then,
We
so yeah, we'll see. We'll see how reliable they are. But maybe, maybe I'll give them a cut of the sales. We'll see.
we can maybe help each other out. Maybe help each other out, Connor, because whenever I was in Morocco, I realized how much French was spoken in Morocco. And in my education, I had 5 years of that sort of high school sort of French, and I realized how much was coming back to me. So I got straight onto Duolingo, and
Oh,
I've been trying
okay.
and so maybe
All
we
right.
should
All
set up
right.
some sort of a weekly, we can sort of
I got
talk to each other
you
in
can
French,
teach
and
me French,
yeah,
basically.
vice versa. It's I'm trying to find someone who is equally as bad at French as I am, so I can rattle to them. So
Well, I'm
um,
certainly bad at French, but you'll have to deal with my Quebecois accent. As I have learned, there are certain parts of the French that I learned as a Canadian, because you, of course, take French for a
of
certain
course.
amount of time, but it's been so long. But yes, there is definitely being in France where you get some of and you're like, they just look at you blankly, and you're like, I know you know what I said. Maybe my accent is this Quebecois accent, like oui versus ouin, but like, come on. I know you know, but monsieur, so yeah,
there you
Je ne
are.
sais pas.
That's
yeah,
the one.
exactly.
Okay, so for those that did not have the good sense to pick up the original Last Witch series, which I know is now subtitled Fear and Fire, uh, give us the boilerplate for the original series.
Sure. So, The Last Witch is a all ages fantasy adventure that follows a young girl by the name of Saoirse. She's just turned 12. She lives in a little village in Ireland, sort of just after the first famine. So we're talking hundreds of years ago. And she desperately wants to be special. And the problem is she is the village outcast. She kind of has this weird birthmark. Her grandmother is this kind of old lady in the woods who messes about with potions. So people will come to see her when when they've got a sick calf or they want a love potion.
Yeah.
But the same reason that people will come see her is the same reason that she's kind of an outcast because she's this woman who can maybe make the calves better kind of thing. Um, and so the story starts on Imbolc Day, which for anybody who's not Irish, not listening to this, is the North American have Groundhog Day, where a cute, furry little, mammal comes out and is like, "Oh, the sun!" Ah! And in Irish tradition, that's the day the Queen of the Witches comes out.
Yeah.
So this is the day that you cannot go outside. And Saoirse has decided that because of it, this is the day that her and the one friend she has, frenemy even, are going to go beyond the hedge that encircles the village and into the deepness of the woods. And they're going to find this crumbling old tower that apparently was probably a chieftain's lair at one point, but apparently in more recent time was the home of a witch. And this being comics, she is going to find something out there, and it is going to be a lot more than she expects. So, in a nutshell, Saoirse is able to, this is when she discovers that she can use magic. But the problem is she discovers this while having a battle with this witch that not everybody survives. And when she gets back home, she discovers that something even worse has occurred. The rest of the coven has attacked this village looking for her, and they basically killed everybody. And so it's just her bratty little brother, and her cigar smoking grandmother who have to work together to help Saoirse kind of absorb the rest of the magics so that she can stop this coven from opening a door that would destroy the world. So kind of think it of like Irish Avatar: The Last Airbender with just the right amount of child cannibalism.
Very important. Just a
Yeah.
soupçon of child cannibalism.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
A sniff of it.
just
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, because if witches ain't trying to eat kids, how do you know they're really
Yeah,
witches?
that's the trick. That's the
They
trick.
could
I
just be
mean,
like Estonian or something.
I mean, it's interesting, the whole in bulk thing, as well. As if I recall from the first series, that was also Saoirse's birthday.
Yes.
Yeah, and since we spoke to you, in bulk, 1st of February was made a national holiday in Ireland, St. Bridget's Day.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
So St. Bridget, or Bridget, in Irish mythology is the youth, the maiden to the crone of the Cailleach.
Yes.
And of course that day, that Imbolc Day, is the day that if the weather on that day is good, you need to be worried because that's the day she's out gathering firewood because she's going to spend the next month, in bad weather eating children and all of that sort of stuff. So, but Bridget is the opposite face of, as I'm sure you know, and that's now a new national holiday in Ireland. It's a public holiday. So
Oh, that's very cool. Now
yeah.
I'm like, man, can I get to Boom and say, why don't we push the book to February 1st? That'd be a perfect day for. It's funny actually because I had known a little bit about the St. Bridget connection, but I did not know. I had not heard until just now the duality of the colic and the
Yeah.
maiden. So that's a little bit of like us. Every once in a while, you write something, and you get this little bit of serendipity, and so that 100% is that I chose that to be the birthday. Because yes, I guess for people smarter than I am, they'll be like, "Oh, Saoirse she's a representation of Bridget," and actually, it's to the other reason that's really interesting is so I like to say this book is sort of it's kind of like a all ages horror
Yeah.
in the sense that it's sort of like the Secret of Nim or the Dark Crystal or the original Brothers Grimm, right? Like these kind of tales that or Irish mythology that can
Yeah.
get dark, right? Where the heroes don't always get everything they want, or sometimes the price they pay for victory is not worth the victory. And so one of the things that goes on in that first book, which I highly recommend people picking up before you read book two, um, at great comic stores all over the place. Alan, we'll do a plug later. Yeah, there you go. um, is the magic in The Last Witch is not for humans. The idea is that it comes from Tir na Og, like it comes from the fairylands, and it's sort of leaked into Ireland through this door, which in the
Yeah.
mythology, the world building is like, yeah, sometimes this door was open. That's why there were tales of leprechauns and things like that in Ireland. This was one of their ways to cross between the worlds. But the magic leaks in. And so only a very few individuals can sense it, touch it, and sort of draw it to them. But because it's not for us, the magic can corrupt and change you. So there's a reason in early in book one, Saoirse encounters this witch we were talking about in the tower. And she's pretty horrific looking. It's amazing character design by Bee, like absolutely fantastic. But at one point in this story, this horrific, like 300 teeth in her mouth kind of monster would have been just another young woman. But through using the magic, it changes her. And so with Saoirse, the more she learns a new spell, the more she picks up another elemental magic, the closer she is getting to defeating the colic and all the rest of the coven, but it's also making her closer and closer into losing what makes her her and to become one of them. And maybe she's actually meant to become the last witch. And so that duality is actually very much in the story because Saoirse runs the risk, maybe Junior Breaking Bad, of becoming the villain of the story.
And it's fantastic actually sort of looking at it. I mean, I don't want to get too far ahead of what we're going to talk about, but at the beginning of the story, Saoirse, the original story, Saoirse has a tattoo or like a mark, a birthmark, and also a mark on her face, if I recall. And whenever you first see that witch, she has certain facial markings that sort of call back later on, and I was like, I didn't realize that until I read the first one, and then I read the first issue of Blood and Betrayal, and then went back and read, and I was like, oh, that's a class. There's not the only callback, but certainly a fantastic callback. So that's something else. But yeah, I mean, there's so much Irish mythology we can talk about around that, and we certainly will get to it. But as we mentioned, it's been 4 years since the first Last Witch in the new series, and as you've mentioned, the original miniseries and the current story were originally supposed to be one piece that were split into two. So, I mean, obviously you're a writer, you never stop, I'm quite sure. So how has that process been between the original Last Witch and the release, which I guess sets it in concrete in some ways, and Blood and Betrayal coming out? How has that process been? Has there been many changes? Has there?
No, not too many, because so the original, it's funny because it's gone through a few things. So originally, I had been working with an editor, Whitney Leopard, who's now gone off to Penguin Random House. She was the kind of the champion of the book. And so originally the idea was we were going to do about like a 250, 270 page like graphic novel. Sort of the size you see from Scholastic. That was almost the idea of the form, was maybe going to be slightly smaller. And then Whitney left partway through the project, and a different editor came over and took over it. And then that editor also moved kind of at the very tail end out, and somebody else kind of came in. But so I think there ended up being a bit of a left hand and the right hand not quite knowing what they were doing, because when the book was finally submitted, the contract we had was, okay, you have to deliver a book that's at least 150 pages. Okay, no problem. This is like 265. And then when it came in, though, there was this pushback of like, wait a second, we were supposed to get a 150-page graphic novel. What is this? And so then there was this sort of back and forth of like, what is it going to turn into? And that's how it eventually turned into two graphic novels. And so really the whole story had been written, right? And so the first change comes when Boom, and all credit to them, appreciated what had been done. And we're like, okay, well, let's change this into 2 books. But that means you need to lengthen the second book, because we don't want to do 150 pages and 110. We could, their market was at least 150 pages. That, they must have figured out that anything slimmer than that, people don't want to pay, $19.99 US or whatever the case may be. So, when you're a writer and somebody's like, do more, you're like, what? Yeah, okay. So there's a lot of things I hadn't got a chance to put into the original conception of The Last Witch that I was then able to put into this sort of second version, because, I had an extra 40, 50 pages to play with. Then once that was done, that was all kind of completed on the page. by the time book one came out. And book one then ended with this to be continued question mark instead of, or sorry, the end question mark instead of to be continued. And it's interesting because if you have a copy of the floppies like you were showing, Keith, the last page says to be continued question mark. But if you have the trade, the last page now reads the end question
Ah,
mark. And you can see that there had been a change of thinking of how likely it was to continue. So at that point, I had the second book written and then had to figure out what we were going to do. So it was mostly a finished piece. Some things did change. V and I had a bunch of conversations. One pretty significant thing changed that it wasn't a lot of rewriting, but it completely changed the context of some of the scenes in book one and also in book two. We came up with a new twist, for lack of a better term.
okay.
And so that changes a lot of the context of the book. So it's interesting for me to read because in book one, these scenes were all written and drawn with a very specific idea for one of the characters in the book, one of the seemingly more minor characters in the book. And then now in book two, there's this twist that completely changes the contextualization of who this character is. And so it's interesting for me to read those first scenes because you're like, oh, will they play? But actually, they play better in some ways because there's none of this writerly game of, oh, I'm going to be clever. I'm going to put in a little, like clue here, a little Easter egg. Because honestly, half the time, 80% of the time you do that, you've underestimated how on top of things your audience is, and they look and they're like, no. It's like that's the bad guy, right? Or that's the like, oh, they're gonna be dead in 13 pages, right? Like you think you've done something clever to foreshadow this big thing, and in reality, it's like, no, no, no. Everybody knows that this character is gonna be dead in 15 pages because you basically screamed it in this piece of dialogue that you thought was oh so subtle. So it actually does work better because these scenes, there's no attempt by me to be like, oh, well, you're going to turn back and you're going to be like, oh, look what he did in the corner of that frame, right? Like, look what he had V do. It's no, there's none of that. So that's interesting. That I find a very interesting thing just from a writerly perspective. And I think I learned not well enough because one of my big debates in the second book was about putting in a little bit of a foreshadowing. And I'm still, of all the things in the book, it's the only thing where I'm like, I was rereading it the other day and I was just like, oh no, now have I given away the game with what I thought was a subtle little piece? You never know, right? Sometimes you
Yeah,
think
yeah,
you've
yeah,
just screamed something to the mountaintops and people don't see it. And
yeah.
other times you're 100% sure you've done something so cute. And no, no, people are just like, well, yeah, it was good, but I don't know why you gave that part away, 60 pages before. And you're like, God damn it, stop being smart.
And I mean, then you'll people read things into people read what they want to see and want
Yes.
to depending on the context in which they're reading. And I mean, we shouldn't also, obviously, you had this all as one piece, and you were thinking ahead. But if I recall, whenever you originally pitched this to Boom, it wasn't quite that way. It wasn't quite as
No,
together as.
no, it was not.
Tell us that story.
No, it was not. So usually, guys, when I do something, I am one of those people who like once I die, I'm no good at just giving like a short little pitch and being like, I'll figure out the rest. I have to figure it all out. It makes my pitch process so slow. I'm worst in between books because I have way too much time to think about way too many ideas and I want them all to just be inch perfect. So usually when I pitch, I'm like, okay, there's a 20-page thing I will give to somebody at the top. So it'll have the art, it'll have all the character stuff. And then there's normally like a 45-page appendix that I'm always like, you don't need to read this, but if you want to know how much thought has gone into this, like here it is. Here's the whole treatment of the story and the background of the world and how does this work. And so I'd sent Boom a bunch of stories. I just finished the regular show Adventure Time crossover. Great book if you can find it. And they asked me for a bunch of pitches. And the last which had been a short story at my trying, I just wanted to try my hand into classic, Irish fairy tale. So it's just about this little girl with this weird birthmark who goes into the woods. She helps a bird. She finds this tower. The witch is there. This bird, because she did this, this animal a good turn, which, I feel is like a classic part of Irish mythology. There's always an old man on the side of the road or a hungry wolf or something. And when the hero does, a goodness to them, it is repaid often, right away. And So that was all really the story was. This girl gets out and she comes out, and the whole idea was, she went in a young girl, she's come out a young woman kind of idea because of this experience, because she now knows there's something different about her, right? She survived this magical attack. And that's so I just had written a short thing about, oh yeah, girl goes in the woods, she meets a witch, she's going to come out. And then I just kind of fudged the rest of it. Oh, it's going to be this, span across the island of Ireland, and there's going to be all these other characters, and there's this great villain, and there's this big twist, which I was just like, oh, and there's a huge twist. I didn't say what it was because I had no idea what it was. And so, a week later or whatever, late Friday, thankfully I was in the Eastern time zone and they were in the Pacific. They call up and they're like, "Oh, those were lots of great ideas, but the one we're most interested in is that which one? We know you always have so much. So like, I know it's a little late now for you to jump into everything. Your kids are probably coming home from school, but like, what if we get it on Monday and you could just lay out the whole story for us?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, that sounds great." And I had nothing. And so that weekend was just me like, what is this story? And to pat myself on the back, like I actually look back, I'm like, man, like deadlines do work because I got the whole thing out, right? I figured it all out because I had to. And it was interesting. The way in ended up being, for anybody who's a big fan of the witch genre, when I said cigar smoking grandma, you might think of Roald Dahl's The Witches, because the main character's grandmother smoked cigars.
Yeah, that's right.
And I stole that because I love the idea of like a grandmother smoking a cigar. It feels kind of transgressive. And it's a very much like, I don't give a shit about what you think about me kind of move for a grandma. But I'd always wondered in The Witches if there had been a specific reason the grandmother had been a cigar smoker. And when I was a kid, I remember thinking that that story was going to go not a very different way, but a slightly different way because of what I thought the cigar meant. Didn't mean that in that book. But once I started thinking about that, and I was like, oh, well, what if my grandmother was a cigar smoker? And what if what I thought happened in The Witches could happen in this story? And once I had that, everything kind of opened up because I'm like, oh, well, that means a grandmother is this kind of character, and she's going to help Saoirse in this very specific way. But that also means, not to give anything away, but if you read the first book, you understand that the grandmother has more
Yep.
of a relationship to the end of the world than you might usually expect. And so once that kind of fell into place, that really opened up for me, oh, what the world was going to be, how Saoirse was going to proceed through it, and how this grandmother was going to be kind of Obi-Wan Kenobi
Yeah.
in the story. And so that just kind of opened things up in a whole new way. But yeah, I went into that with a paragraph and a couple of ideas. And of course, that was when they were like, and it's actually just happened to me again. I was doing another pitch session and I presented a whole bunch of ideas. And of course, they picked two, one that I've done some work on, and one that really all I had was the title. And I'll who knows if this will ever happen, but the title's just The Last Barbecue on Earth. And they're like, that's a great title. And I'm like, yeah, and like, it's kind of about this. And like, that's great. They're like, great, send me the pitch deck. And I'm like, I'm gonna need till mid-August to do that. I'm traveling back and forth. And yeah, so there you go. We'll have to try it again. But yeah, so that
Brilliant.
was it had never happened before in my career, but it was definitely a good experience. So it was a
Yeah.
good test.
Brilliant. I think we talked about it the last time, but the Nan, Saoirse's Nan, whenever you talk about cigar smoking grannies, it always makes me think of, as I'm sure it does Alan now, Grandma Ben and in Bone.
Yes.
Who is for me the ultimate cigar smoking granny.
Well, not only that, but the grandmother in Once and Future, Kieran Gillen and Dan Mora's. Because I seem to remember Once and
Oh
Future was coming out around the
yes.
same time as The
Oh,
Last Witch, and I
I
think
hadn't
we
thought
were
about
having
that.
conversations in the store about who the most kick-ass grandmother was.
Yes, we did. Yeah, we were having a bit of a yeah.
Because I think, yeah, the grandmother character Once in Future was great as well. But I love that you're setting up this advice for up and coming writers. When it comes to pitch session, guys, the most underdeveloped idea you have will sound the most exciting to these people. So just be prepared to put the work in afterwards because deadlines do work. That's a banner right there.
Well,
Deadlines
and
do.
it's true too, because one thing you can get caught on when you have too much information, you want to put all the information in, and that's not what a pitch is for. A pitch is to make something sound as
Yeah,
fun as
tease. Yeah.
possible. Whatever the depth, if it's a horror thing, then fun is bloody dismemberment, right? But it's like keep it fun, and that's nobody really cares that much in the pitch session if it makes sense. If it sounds fun, they're interested. And honestly, you really don't get that many points for your story making sense. You
Hmm.
get points for your story being fun. If your
Mm.
story is fun, and then when somebody sits back and wants to pull it apart a bit, they can't really pull it apart that easily. That's, I think, when you end up having a story that can transcend just being good. But yeah, if you've got to choose, and I'm horrible at this, but if you got to choose between your story making like sense and it being fun as hell, go fun as hell every time because that's what people want. They want fun. And then, yeah, if it makes sense, that's great, except for the Star Trek crowd, but that's a whole different story, and that's fine too because that's what Star Trek is for. Star Trek doesn't have to be fun as long as you're like, that's exactly how the holodeck functions. That's all they need.
Yeah, that's a conversation for you and Keith to have off air at this point, I would imagine. But no, I mean, what's great about The Last Witch is it operates in that space in comics where, as you say, it's an all ages book, and when the way we have designed our store, we have like graphics by set up by publisher and so on and so forth. But we have created a younger readers section for sort of 6 to 12, because once you hit 12 and over, comics are easy recommendations to people. Marvel movies saw to that. There's, aside from the Punisher and Venom, really, and Carnage, you can recommend nearly anything Marvel wise. But we got that younger readers section, so there is some good stuff for younger readers to read. But with The Last Witch, it toes a line quite well, because it's creepy and it's dark and it's definitely something there for adults as well. And it is a difficult line to toe. We've talked as well to a couple of guys a few times and also hosted David M. Bourne, our store, and Drew Zucker, who do Canto, and they toe that line really well as well. I mean, how do you toe that line? Is there a temptation to veer more into more adult storytelling, or are you always conscious of the fact I would love my kids to read this and enjoy it, and therefore try and get that balance?
I mean, I'm a horrible dad. Like my kids have probably read a bunch of stuff that they should, but I feel like that's, comes with that territory with your dad being a writer. I don't think about it too much. I do think, when you kind of get into the vibe of a story, then, as you start to write, you start to understand what the story is, right? So I don't think there's too many times like, I was never tempted to have some like, Saoirse turns into Frank Castle to use the Punisher example, and you beat somebody to death with a tire iron, right? Like
You
there's
came
some
up with that
things.
idea very quickly. Are you sure
Oh,
you
thank
didn't
you.
think about that before?
But like, but like, so from that perspective, but I kind of believe, I think kids want to be scared, right? I think, as long as you're in the safety of the rules of the story. Um, and I think that when you do things, if a kid doesn't want to engage in it, they often just kind of blow by it, right? So there are a couple of subtle things, one subtle in the first book, one less subtle, but still relatively subtle in the second book, where you realize that characters, like named characters, have probably died. But it's not like it's there, but it's not a huge thing. So things like that, I think, a kid may catch it, they may not catch it. If they do or they do not, it doesn't really affect the narrative thrust of the story, but it may add that extra level of intensity. Oh my gosh, this character, oh my gosh, they didn't make it kind of thing. Um, but yeah, I don't worry too much. I really do think kids can take a lot more than you think. I think there's some obvious things in terms of the idea of like, like there's not a lot of violence that happens in The Last Witch, and even if there is anything that would be more, a lot of it kind of happens off stage or it's pulled back. Like I feel like that's a big difference between, somebody getting hit by lightning in a wide shot versus somebody being right up front and you can see their eyes and they're screaming. Like that's a bit more like Teen X-Men and Storm's got somebody, right? Like that's kind of how you do it. But yeah, I mean, I think the story is pretty intense. The second book is more intense than the first book. There are more things. There was a section that when I wrote it, my kids had the Princess's Bride response, like
Oh,
Fred
oh.
Savage in the bed, like no, no, that's not how it's supposed to be, grandfather. Like no, dad. Like what do you mean? Like no, dad, you got to change that. Like that's not okay. Like no, dad. And it's like no, like that's why it's happening.
Yeah.
Because, but I think as long as you give the and then this is true for any age reader, you've got to give them what you promised them. And ultimately, The Last Witch is it's a coming of age book, right? It as long as it delivers that at the end, then any tougher twists and turns hopefully result in the kind of book that you remember because you're like, I was scared it wasn't going to give me what it promised, but it did. And so the journey ended up becoming that much more interesting because of it. So yeah, I mean that's kind of how I look at it is just take them on a journey and yeah, put any reader into some places where they're uncomfortable. And I think one thing I did notice though is that the pacing of this book, and maybe this is more of an all ages, is it kind of starts slow and then it ramps up. In the second issue, it ramps up into this big confrontation with Saoirse and a witch, and it's intense and it's frightening. And then Saoirse finds out all the horrible things about what's happened to her village. But then we have a chunk of time where it's quieter. We're in a safe spot. We're in Nan's cottage, and nothing comes and breaks through the door and sends them on the road right away. You get a chance to decompress, like Saoirse wants to have. So, and then I find like for book two, which just the issue one just came out, issue two is coming out on the 30th of July. It follows a very similar arc. The first issue of the New Blood and Betrayal is actually pretty slow paced to begin. It's more about the family a little bit, and then it ramps up when this wolf comes out of the woods kind of thing. And and then it seems to hit, it's got a big cliffhanger at the end of this issue. And then the first part of issue two is going to be intense. It's probably the most creepy of the whole book. But then after that, we get another space where we're going to have a chance to decompress. And I think maybe that subconsciously was something where I'm like, oh, if it stays at too high a pitch too long, that might wear out some
Yeah, it
younger
loses its
readers.
impact. Yeah.
Yeah, as opposed to like an amazing action movie or horror movie where you're just like 15, 20 minutes you get in and it just doesn't stop. That is its certain pleasure. But I think in comics and in prose, that's a little harder to do without kind of wearing thin.
I mean, I think what you're there's a couple of really good points you made there, but I mean, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, that you can have a standard, Marvel or DC comic book that's just it's all action all the way through, and it doesn't do anything for you. But the tension and the flow of certainly the original Last Witch series and the first issue of Blood and Betrayal, there's not necessarily a lot of action per se, but there is a lot of tension. There's a lot of ratcheting up and ratcheting down, and I
Thank you.
think you do it fantastically. I don't think you need that sort of fist on face action to always be the thing. And I think it does it absolutely fantastically. But then the other thing that you sort of said there about expectation and giving readers what they want, or what you know there's an awful lot of argument in comics media now, and comics news about, well, this isn't what I wanted to happen to my hero, this isn't, or the company isn't responding to what the fans want. But if the fans got what they want all the time, it would be really boring, and that analogy about your kids, going, "Oh, Dad, that's not what should happen here," and just exactly that, Princess Bride. It's that eventually you will get the story about your character being the hero that you expect them to be, but not without adversity, not without something happening that you don't want to happen. It's some really interesting points there. Definitely, Connor.
Well, thank you. And I was thinking, just to add on to that, I think one of the nice things about being in all ages and a little bit creator owned is, it's not like I don't have 35 years of Saoirse fans who are like, no, Saoirse is this, right? I think that's one of the challenges. I mean, I've never had the opportunity to write, a big two hero. I wrote a spec script for Batgirl. It's about as close as I ever got to that. Me and Anthony Delcall from Kill Shakespeare. And maybe who knows in the future, call me. I got a few ideas, but I do think I can't imagine the pressure on that. The closest we got that was maybe in Kill Shakespeare when we were doing something with Juliet, and we did a third book in the series where Juliet was put through the absolute ringer there. The third book in Kill Shakespeare, if you don't know it, is basically it's like all of Shakespeare's characters in the same world. It's like the Justice League of Shakespeare. And so Juliet was with Hamlet, but had been with Romeo, and Romeo was trying to like work it through. And some really intense stuff happened to Juliet, and Juliet did some pretty questionable things that made some of the other characters kind of turn on her. And the review, it was really instructive because there was this one review. It kind of started off with like, "Oh, this is a great series," and this reviewer had loved Juliet, loved her in the first two books, and then it was like, "I don't know if I really love what they're doing to Juliet. I don't really love what she's being put through. Like, this is not okay." And then Juliet's response comes in, and now she's kind of angry. This reviewer is like, "Wait a second, this is falling into some really tropey stuff, and I do not like it, and I really like." And then they got to the end of the story, and they basically were like, I should have trusted these guys. Like, they wrote this character so well the first time. Like, I should have trusted that they hadn't lost that skill but I was really scared because the way it was going, I thought it was going to end this very particular tropey way, and it didn't. And it's great that it didn't, and I really enjoyed it. But it was, she was kind of debating that very point you're making of like, would I have enjoyed the story better if I got more of what I wanted the whole way, or will I, when I sit with this and have a few months to digest, will I actually like this story much better because of it? And that's, and that's honestly, it's a personal taste thing. Like, aside from some of the stuff where you hear people getting upset about characters because it's like, I don't know, this character can't be of this ethnicity or this, like, that stuff. I'm like, I'm not, miss
Yeah,
me with that. Like, I'm not a big fan of that. But when you're talking about a character, you know, Captain America, whomever it is, whether it's male, female, black, white, when they're doing things that you're like, oh, that doesn't feel like Captain America, I understand why fans get upset,
yeah,
but you really, really you have to give the writer the chance to land the plane. And if
yeah,
they land it, then
exactly.
that's great. Hopefully the whole thing will be better. And if they send it crashing into a house on the other side of the runway, well, like, run there and put it out. But like then you can yell, right? But and that's a risk you take as a writer because sometimes you think you've landed that thing. You're like, I mean, you're trying to land it on the runway every time, of course. And sometimes you're like, oh shit, I skidded off and took out that public school, right? Like
Damn it.
yeah, oops. Sorry. So yeah, I mean, you never know, right? It's once it's out of your hands, it's not your story anymore.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. And speaking about, obviously it's never just your story, So you've assembled this fantastic team, V Glass, Natalia Nesterenko, or maybe I should say reassembled for this book to some extent. Tell us a wee bit more about that team and working with them, about your process.
Oh, it's incredible. I mean, I think The Last Witch is a really good story. I think book two
Yes.
in its fullness will, I think, knock on wood, I really hope people be like, wow, this is one of the better all ages titles I've read in a long time. And even if I'm right, it pales in comparison to the work me and Natalia have done. Like when you open The Last Witch, it is like sumptuous. Like it is so good. V is so talented. They have this ability to both have like a very simple design. Kind of somebody was said to me that they were like, oh, their characters are like Disney characters. Like they're instantly recognizable. They're not overly complex. There's enough detail there for you to get nuance, but they're really accessible characters. And yet at the same time, they can build these worlds. You can get into a panel and just feel like you could step into it and just walk forever. There's a scene, I think it's the fourth or fifth page of the book. I was talking about how Saoirse is she going to go in the forest, and there's this great, almost full page spread of the forest with Saoirse and her friend Padraig, very small at the bottom. And I don't know how many branches are drawn on that page, but it's well into the hundreds. And it's that kind of effort that V does, where there's very rarely just a colored background, every once in a while for effect, but
Uh,
like they
there's a
just do such
depth.
an incredible
Yeah.
job of, yeah. And I feel like that's so important when you're doing a world building story, which fantasy adventures, very much about the world, right? Survival horror, the world often doesn't matter, right? That's not what you're there for. It's for something different. Fantasy adventure, you're there for the world,
Yeah.
right? That is a big part of the appeal of the genre. And V's ability to make the world feel tangible is absolutely like they are the star of the book. They should be a way bigger name in comics than they are. I'm subtly kind of glad about that because I've got a couple of things that I want to do with them, and if they jumped into I would just never be able to do it with them. And then Natalia just came in, and V was originally going to color it, and then when we had that thing with Boom, where they're like, oh well, it's got to be 150. Okay, it's 260. Actually, no, it needs to be 320. That changed. So V all of a sudden was like, oh, I got to draw another 60, 70 pages. Because at the time we thought it was all going to just come out bang, bang, bang. I don't have time to do that into color. And so Natalia came in, and Natalia just has this, again, the kind of the weird like ability where the bright and happy scenes feel like a bright, happy comic. And then immediately you can turn the page. And even though the palette hasn't changed, it's now a completely menacing sort of situation. And Natalia just has this great ability. And I think the thing that really struck me was, sometimes when an artist is going to color a book and then they can't, that can be tough, right? Because you have this very specific idea of what you want to
Yep.
do. And of course, no matter what you ask somebody to do, they're never going to do it quite the way you wanted. And VA has this incredible ability to just let go and be like, it's not mine anymore. But also, Natalia had this like ESP ability to just figure out how. I think they had maybe two or three like discussions early in the process where V was like, I'm thinking more this way, and Natalia was either yes or well, what if? And then boom, everything just came in, and like the only time there was ever a note was like, oh, like somebody had made a minor mistake and we missed, oh, you missed coloring this part of the thing. And V's the same way for the script. Like V is one of those collaborators where I'm like, tell me more. Like I want more of your feedback because every time you say something, like you're such a talented storyteller in your own right that you every time you have a comment, it's going to make the book better. And they're also a really great artist in the sense that the few times I would come in and say, hey, I think we could do this differently. Once I explained it, they were like, yeah, yes, I love it. Right. And every once in a while, you know what? No. And here's why. Like, what if we did it this way, though? And then it's like, okay. But pretty much every time they would just get excited to be like, oh, yeah, like, okay. Yeah, yeah. And then they would come back with this just incredible page.
Brilliant.
So, yeah, so good. I mean, Jim Campbell was doing the original lettering. And then he couldn't do so Taylor Esposito, sorry, I won't say Esposito, but that's more the Italian pronunciation. Taylor Esposito of Ghost Cliff came in and did the second book,
Mhm.
and lettering often gets overlooked, but both those guys just it is such an important part of the book. It's like sound in a movie. Nobody thinks
Mhm.
about it until it's bad. And yeah, the lettering in this book is top notch. So they should both get Eisners.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, and we were lucky enough over the past couple of weeks to have some really good weather here. And I mean, if the way that V draws and Natalia colors, if only Ireland was so bright and so colorful and so lovely looking and rain free all the time, it would be
Yeah,
quite something.
I feel like I didn't put enough rain into this book now that I'm thinking about it. There's a little rain in book one, but I'm like, there's snow. I was like, that's definitely the Canadian in me because I was like, oh, this scene would be so much better in snow. And I'm like, sure, it doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. Whatever. It's magic.
The funny thing was that historically, the famine of 1740 was a big snow all across Europe. So
Oh,
you
that's
could
right.
be you
That's
could
right.
be
There you go.
historically right on. There you go.
There you go. Thank you. You see, this is just
I've
it's
got
all up
I've
there
got your back,
somewhere.
Connor. I've got your
I
back.
appreciate
You
that.
know.
I feel there's a volume three of Last Wish coming soon, co-written by Mr. Keith Miller. The ideas he's throwing out here, he's making sure they're on, they're recorded and on the record. So just in case certain things step up,
The royalty checks will be flowing in, literally
Time.
tens of cents.
He'll be too big for this podcast anymore. He'll have set up his own one. It all starts here. This is the tipping point.
Move along, move along.
Okay, so obviously Blood and Betrayal number one came out in the middle of June. Number two is out next week, as you say. We're recording this 23rd of July. It's due out on the 30th of July. Where do we pick up the tale of Saoirse, Bram, Nan, and Hugh?
Okay, so for book one, we are issue one of book two. So we've jumped forward a couple of weeks. So the end of book one was basically I mentioned this kind of Breaking Bad scenario. So the end of book one ends with a scenario where not Nan, Brom, her little brother, and Hugh, who's kind of joined our little fellowship. He's this half fairy, can kind of help boost Saoirse's powers, and is more aware of what's behind that door than anybody else. So he's keenly interested in keeping it shut. It ends with a place where the three of them are starting to get worried about where Saoirse is going mentally. And it's really bookended wonderfully by a couple of shots that you get at the very beginning of the book when you first see Saoirse. And then the last shot is another kind of face-on shot of Saoirse. And she's not a different character because when you first see her, she's kind of upset. And when you see her here, she's upset. But the way she's upset, how she looks, the way she's responding to her anger, V tells the whole story in just those two shots, right? Like you could just show something in those two shots and they'd be like, oh, okay, well, this must have happened, in terms of what's happened to this character. So book two picks up where a couple weeks after Saoirse is continuing to try to control the magic and the emotions it is now provoking in her. And Brahm has had a kind of a low-key traumatic experience. And so he was trying to like kind of keep everybody light and happy. And so they are playing hurling, the game that their father played with them. And it is a moment of you get to see Saoirse again, actually just getting to be a big sister. And that young lady we saw at the beginning of the book. And they're having fun and they're teasing each other. And then, the ball gets overhit and suddenly they're in the woods. And suddenly they're running into this, I'll say basically they're running into another coven of witches that is going to tell Saoirse that everything she thinks she knows about magic is wrong and that the path she is going on is wrong. And this is going to provoke a pretty extreme response in Saoirse because, hey, everything she's been told she's getting it all wrong and the stakes are so high. And it's a bit of also a critique of her as a person. And so this is going to now launch us off into the back half of this adventure where Saoirse is increasingly going to be struggling with the power inside of her and how it feels inside of her, what it makes her feel like she wants to do. She's not blind to the impact that the magic is having on her, but one part of her is very much like, it doesn't matter because I have to like hold on. If it destroys me, that's fine because I'm the only one who can save the world. And a little but growing part that's like, I don't mind. I like the power. I actually kind of like it that you're frightened of me because you know what? I've had to deal with enough crap for my whole life. Maybe it's time that I can give it out. So you know what? Maybe step back. And so we're going to see Saoirse book two. We're going to see her have to take on the remaining members of this coven. And eventually she's going to have to come face to face with the Caliph, the queen of the witches. And there are going to be, it's going to be very cliche, but there are going to be some unlikely allies. There are going to be new villains that arrive. And that will culminate ultimately in Saoirse finding out what's behind that door and whether what's behind that door could actually tempt her to want to just throw it wide open. Or whether she could battle and defeat it. And if she does, well, what is the cost going to be? Because again, as we talked at the very top, Irish mythology is one big part of the trope is the hero is going to lose almost as much as they gain. And so, yeah, I think it'll be I think it's going to be a really exciting read. I think the second book is going to, this is the part where my kids are like, no, 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 it can't happen. Dad, you have to change that. So I think there's going to be some of that. I think it's, I've got some of the kids on my street back home who've been reading it and I've been getting the feedback and I can see when they've got to something because whether they come out and they're like excited or if they're looking at me with like mean eyes, because I've let them get a little bit ahead of everything.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I think I really do. I think it's a great, if you've got a young reader at home, if you've got someone who just devours books, if they devour adventure, if they love magic, um, if they like a hero who is not always perfect and prissy and wonderful, if they like a hero who gets some dirt under their fingernails and makes mistakes, then yeah, I mean, this is a book for that young reader in your household, 100%. But also, if you're someone who likes like the Brothers Grimm, if you like a good fairy tale yourself, I think it's a complex enough story, and you guys
Yeah.
have told me that, and others have as well, that it's actually a very satisfying read for someone who just likes a good fantasy adventure, likes a good fairy tale. Yeah, I mean, I'm very excited to see how people take book two because it's going to start ratcheting up that tension, as you said. And yeah, if you like book one, book two is this is again very cliche, but it is kind of hopefully more of all the stuff you enjoyed while still being very focused in its story. And if you haven't read The Last Witch, yeah, go down to a certain store that a certain someone in this podcast might own. Grab book one. It'll be a great read. I promise you'll enjoy it. If only for the amazing pictures. Forget about the words. The pictures will like they are incredible. But yeah, it is a great book. It is I've got three kids. They're always running out of things to read. If you've got a kid who's looking for something to read, grab them this book, and then you're going to read it yourself and be like, oh, let me read it to you again tonight. That's actually why I first wrote this book was I wanted something to read to my kids that was going to have enough action adventure. It was going to have kind of get them connected with their Irish heritage, but also something that I would be like, oh, I would want to read this multiple times because it would just scratch all the itches that I have for what a good young adult, or not even young adult, but a younger reader book should be.
Yeah. I mean, there's that's just what you're saying about Sorsha and the having the power and liking the power and maybe where she'll go with that. It's funny. It's fairly typical of that idea of otherness, and she very much falls into that category. I think for me that she's been othered as a result of her birthmark and her parentage and her nan and even from the village that she was supposed to be part of. And sometimes whenever that othering takes place and then that individual or that group gains power, that doesn't always go the right way. If you look at for example, uh, the Irish whenever they went to America. and were downtrodden and so forth and so on, but and had been othered for so long, and then ended up taking on positions of power in the police, and then actually, punching down on other groups, and you know what I mean. There's definitely something there, but I mean that's probably again me just looking into it probably further than I need to, but I mean the book definitely is very much steeped in Irish culture and mythology, set in medieval Ireland, probably around that first recorded famine around 1740, 1740. We say famine, around 1740, 1741. The first issue has, I think, a pretty dark first couple of pages. That would, and there's a callback there with the
Oh,
bird.
that's right. Yes, I forgot
Yeah,
about that. Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. No,
that
that's right.
was
That's right.
that
That's bad.
that that's excellent. And the story picks up as you said with Bram and Hugh beating about with the Hurras, and then we have the Bien Fiasa, the wise women, and later Bram seems, I don't know, he seems to stand or lie on what we would refer to as a fairy sod, the stand in the sod, and whenever that happens, people get confused or disappear for a period of time, as is the case. And even back to the character names and everything else, obviously your heritage plays a key role here, but how have you gone about your research? Because there's an awful lot there.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I grew up reading a lot of Irish mythology when I was a kid. I came from my dad was, so I was born in Canada. My dad was the immigrant, right? He was first
Yeah.
generation Canadian. He's a dub, came from there. My mom's family, if you go far enough back, would have had Irish, Scottish heritage and
Hmm.
British heritage, but they've been in Canada for quite a long while. So I think I was naturally drawn to what seemed different, right? Which was my dad's heritage. Um, and so I just really got interested. I was always interested in Irish mythology. I was always kind of interested in like where my roots were from. And so a lot of it was reading the various like classic collections of Irish mythology, um, and you know, and a little bit, getting learning about the history of the island, the political history of the island, what the troubles were, like the Civil War, like all these things, and just getting a sense of this kind of um, history. But it's also just thinking of times when I'd been in Ireland and just the music and the friendliness and the social nature of the Irish people. Um, it was funny because every time my dad would go back, he would always be kind of annoyed for the first couple of days because people stop and they chat with you, and he was still very much in it. He used to work as a business person. He was involved in finance, and so we kind of had this very like I got to move, like I don't have much time in my day kind of thing. And somebody would stop you, be on this road, halfway to some other village, and there'd be the one petrol station, and the guy would come out and they would slowly do their thing, and they would chat to you about Father McGilvery's, how he was doing, and the cattle in the field over there, how they'd broken through a fence, and my dad would just be like, "Could you just give me the petrol, please?" But within a day or two, his old accent would have come back in force. So he would sound like a completely different person. And then he would be at the petrol station chatting away and all reminiscing. And so it was very interesting to see how the effect of the culture had on him, how it really brought him back to that version of himself. Um, and so yeah, so research, I just tried to look at as much as I could. And I mean, like so many mythologies, there are different stories that tell the same story slightly different ways. So I
Yeah.
wasn't too concerned about did I have the absolute perfect version of Imbolc or the Bee or anything like that, right? Like it wasn't that. So from that perspective, there was a little bit of freedom. And then yeah, I was trying to put in some fun Easter eggs, like you noted, like in issue one from it is kind of it is a type of a very mount as you see what happens in issue two or when you see what happens. So it's just little things like that that people who are big Irish mythology fans would be able to pick up Easter eggs. And if you were someone who knew nothing about Irish mythology, you're looking at these names and you're like Sauro Rise, right? Like you don't have it. That it was going to be something that would be feel very familiar very quickly. And I think that's what the timelessness of any mythology can do for you, because of course you can draw parallels between Irish mythology and so many other different types of mythology. So yeah, I wanted it to be a love letter. I mean, I'm very proud of my Irish heritage, and I'm very proud of the fact that I've been able to share it with my kids. And yeah, I also think it would be neat if some people read The Last Witch and then just kind of get intrigued by what other Irish mythology stories are out there. That would be awesome, right? Like, I think Irish mythology is great, and I just yeah, I just think, I wanted it to be a bit of a love letter to this culture that, I straddle in a little bit, but I'm also very aware that having the Irish heritage doesn't make me Irish. That's a very different thing. But every time I visit Ireland, it's one of those things where, like, I think of what it was like to visit Ireland when I was a kid, where Ireland was demonstrably poorer than Canada, right? Like it was stuff that we had to be cautioned about. Don't use too much water. Like it was very clear to me that
Mm.
this was, the first time I ever saw a gun was crossing into the north, where they had the gun kind of in the thing and they're
Yep.
covering us and they look at right. So like I was very, the time I was on a bus and I said I was going to Derry and the guy beside me was like, I'm in London, Derry, don't ya? Right. And I was like, yes, yes, I do. Right. The red-handed ulster, like all these things. So like ostensibly, Ireland should have the branding of like, I don't know, kind of a bit of a dangerous island and like, the shoes are there or, like, but instead you think of like what people think of Ireland. And it is this notion of storytelling, music, a good crack, right? A drink. And there is something about the character of the Irish people. And I think especially in the last, say, 20, 25 years, as I hope I don't offend anybody, but as the Catholic Church has seen its influence wane, where you've just seen there's a fair-mindedness and a compassion and an interest in the world. I look at a band like Kneecap that's out right there and how they talk about what's going on in the world and how they talk about that this is a quintessentially Irish issue and that the
Hmm.
Irish should be talking about this. And there's something about, I'm a pretty lefty, so again, not to offend anybody, but like I'm a lefty, man. And so there, I get this deep pride when you see people, I just think it just amazes me. And I know it's not perfect. I know, a lot of my friends who are in Ireland are like, oh yeah, things have changed. And I wonder if the Irish have gotten too wealthy and maybe they've forgotten what it was like to feel hungry and to feel oppressed. But I does feel that is a core element of the Irish character is just this idea of we are with the underdog. We were or maybe still are the underdog, and we're always going to put a leg in for someone who needs help, because that's the way to do things, and it's lovely, yeah. And so that's what I kind of wanted from these characters. I mean, they fight, they have issues, but ultimately their bonds are unbreakable, and they are going to, no matter what, they're going to fight to try to save the world even though they could all run. Like it's established early that they could run and be safe, and they're not going to do it. And I think I think that does say something about the character of the Irish. So there you go. There's my little love letter for all the Irish people listening. That was not intended to be a suck up, but I guess it was me sucking up a little bit. But that way, if you see me in the streets, if I'm in Dublin, if I'm in Belfast, and we're promoting this book, you can tip a cap and I'll sign a book for you. I mean, it's yeah, I just love getting to spend time in Ireland.
Tip a cap and buy you a pint, I think is what you really meant to say there.
Wow. I mean, how many pints can one man drink, Alan?
When in Ireland, when in
Fair
Ireland.
enough. Fair enough.
We do intend to challenge that assertion at some point, Connor.
But yeah, you've been very, very generous with your time. I just have a few more questions just to
Sure.
sort of start to wind down with. Just, really want to, get into the nuts and bolts of The Last Witch and really, do everything we can to promote the heck out of it. I mean, one of the key themes seems to be that magic has a cost. Whether that's the direct cost to Saoirse, her nan, magic cost her daughter, or the indirect cost to Saoirse's relationships, or the physical cost to Bram. We know from chatting to you before that Spider-Man is your guy. Is there a little hint there of power and responsibility going on?
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure, for sure. I mean, I think for 100%, I love Spider-Man. That's always stuck with me. I think that's such a great message, right? I mean, it's like for everybody in the world, it's like, man, you should teach your kids, hey, whenever you have power, whether that's because you're the captain of the team or you're tall or people listen to you, like, yeah, you should be looking around and being like, how am I impacting other people? Right? Am I making people's lives better or worse? And 100%. I think for Saoirse, it's not like the responsibility aspect because like as we were just saying like she's kind of embodying my glorification of the Irish character of like she's going to take the responsibility even when she is being grabbed by the magic. It's not so much that she's not going to see this fight through. It's more the question of how is she going to fight it. So I guess you start to skirting in the responsibility of how much should you use your power, where should you learn to like I always love the idea in Spider-Man he talks about how he's pulling his punches, right? Like
Yeah,
one of my
yeah.
favorite comics was Spider-Man versus Wolverine. And there's this big conversation early on they fight and Spider-Man is pulling his punches. And then he realizes if he keeps doing that, like Wolverine will kill him. And I love that because you're like, wow, there is this whole other level of power that Spider-Man has that he keeps very carefully hidden. Because if he really loses it, you're like, wow, Spider-Man is actually so much stronger than you really give him credit for it, kind of.
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah, yeah.
so, that's the thing. Yeah, and I do think, and I think that's kind of the role of Brahm very much in the story, and Nan, and another character who will not be named because they're a bit of a surprise,
Hmm.
of trying to keep Saoirse true to herself and true to that notion of the little girl who went into the woods, saw a sick bird, and was like, "We're going to try to save this bird's life, right?
Hmm.
Let's do what we can to help who we can." And yeah, 100%. I don't think I entered into it that way, but yeah, this is I guess in a weird way, a bit of a love letter to Spidey as well.
Yeah, I suppose it is. Whenever you mentioned, about Spidey pulling his punches, my mind is cast to that. I can't remember which Daredevil story it was, Alan, but there was a moment where effectively Daredevil had to be taken down. It was start of Devil's Reign or something, wasn't it?
It
After
was the
Daredevil,
start of Zdarsky's run after he
yeah,
had accidentally killed someone,
that's
and
right. And
Spider-Man was waiting in his apartment for him.
it was Spider-Man comes into Daredevil's apartment, and obviously Daredevil can sense things that the other folks can, and he can sense the power in Spider-Man, the strength, the fact that he pulls every punch, and the fact that I think what Matt Murdock says at that time is he really is the best of us. That was that's such a class scene. But I mean that sort of leads me on a wee bit, to the whole idea of the cost of magic, and part of that cost being how it's affecting Sorsha and her emotions, how it's bringing up whether it's bringing up her anger, or whether her anger is whether it's controlling the magic, and of course that anger reflects her status as a teenager, you know hi Alfie, uh that
Can I ask a question?
Let's do it. Hey, Alfie, I'm Connor. Oh, he's like, yeah, I don't have a good
Yeah,
question
not
for you.
interested. So
He'll be reading the last switch before too long, I'm sure.
that
It's like, I thought you
anger.
had Scott Snyder on today, Dad. What?
I'm not interested in that guy. But yeah, I mean that anger sort of reflects her status as a teenager, who's maybe learning to understand her own emotions, and also her loneliness and her otherness, but anger definitely is like a theme in here, cast my mind to Hulk, or even to Star Wars, that, anger leads to, all of
Yeah.
these, all of that sort of stuff. There's definitely something in there. Uh,
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of addressed in the first issue the first issue of Blood and Betrayal, the one that was out that you showed the cover for. That's kind of the conversation that the White Witches, the wise women are having, is this idea of your intention in magic matters, which is, a very old Wiccan, thought, right? That's
mhm,
nothing new. That
mhm.
that is a key part of, like, if you're a modern witch, the idea is like, yeah, it's like all about intention. Um, and I also think, yeah, like, when you're on the cusp of teenhood, there's a lot of things you're feeling, a lot, you are dealing with a lot of anger, emotions, hormones. For young women, that happens earlier. They're maturing quicker. They're dealing with things in a different way than young men are. They really are. My daughter's about to turn 12, and she is really starting to turn into a young woman. My son, who's 10, is light years away from that. Even though he's a year and a half, really only behind her, he's not a year and a half behind her in terms of becoming a young man. It just
Mhm.
happens in a different
Mhm.
stage. And so, yeah, I mean, I do think, like, a big part of, this is a coming of age story, and a
Yeah.
huge part of coming of age story is learning who you are. And I think it was, and I think it's important. I don't think this was intentional because my daughter was younger, but I do think there's something important about young women being like, hey, it's totally okay. Like, I am angry and I feel anger, and I have to find a way to get that anger out, you know, and like with the Hulk, right? It's like, okay, but I, there has to be a line.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, there is some of that. I mean, it's certainly not meant to be like a self-help manual or anything, but yeah, for sure. When you're going through that stage of life, any major change, right? It could be
Yeah.
having children, right? Getting married, like, change change creates tension, and we as a species are often kind of shitty at dealing with that tension. And so, this is just another way to see, like, oh yeah, man, it's so easy to lose control. And that's why it was important for me to Saoirse to have a team around her
Yeah.
that, even though they call her on when they are scared for her, they are still unwaveringly supportive. Nobody's like, Saoirse, you got mad and I'm leaving, right? Like, maybe Brahm does once, but he's like 7. because he's legitimately frightened. But like, Nan's not turning her back on her. This is
No.
not. I hate that trope in stories of like
Yeah.
when the best friends get into like this totally contrived fight and then they walk off other directions. Like you're like, no, man. The more true thing to me is like you get in the big fight and your friend is still standing beside you, but you can still tell they're pissed off,
Yeah.
right? Like they haven't left you, but we haven't solved the problem yet either. But this other thing is bigger, and then that gives you ways to play. It's much more interesting to me to see the ally maybe failing in the biggest moment because now it's gone too far than for them to have this totally manufactured fight where
Yeah.
you're like, oh, well, they're
Yeah.
going to be back in half an act.
Yeah. Well, it totally describes that scene early on in the book, which I thought was maybe one of the darkest scenes was whenever Saoirse loses her temper and grabs Bram. And
Yes.
but as you say, he doesn't melt. He gives her it right back, and
Because it's her brother.
well, exactly, of course, who's taking that. But I mean, so that was, they never had a chance quite to resolve that just yet. But I mean, I'm quite sure we'll get there. I love what we're finding out about Nan, as things progress. What is her link to all of these covens of witches, her link to the wise woman, the being, the being Fiasa, and that moment that I just haven't quite figured out yet, where she's suggesting that anger can definitely be a tool in the fight against witches, and every part of us is convinced that that's maybe a wee bit more dark side than light side. So it's some great stuff going on, Connor. Some absolutely brilliant stuff.
Well, I mean, and I think it's fair to ask about Nan is like she's committed to this fight,
Yeah.
but like she is a bit of a mirror to Saoirse, and as we've learned
Mm.
more about her, we don't know her full history. We don't
No.
know necessarily maybe what her anger has uh, caused her to do or
Hmm.
allowed her to do. And, I think it's an open question as to whether, yeah, like you said, it's like, oh, tapping into your anger, is that inherently, dark side evil? Or, to look at it the different way, it's like in the world we are now, which is probably not so much different from the world as it's always been, there are times where it's like, hey, wait a second, like I need to be angry about this. I have to harness that anger. But if I'm not angry about, I mean, again, not to make this political, but I mean, as a Canadian who was looking at Trump talking about, oh, well, we're just going to take over your country. Like if I just sit there and laugh it off, like you have to be angry. You
Yep.
need like when
Yep.
things happen that you think are fundamentally morally wrong, anger is actually like that is a tool. If you go too
It
far
is
where
an
all of a sudden
appropriate
you're like, oh,
response.
I
Yeah.
want to wipe
Yeah.
out the other, quote unquote, my enemies. No, no, you need to still be able to find your compassion, your humanity. People you disagree with or even maybe hate what they're saying are still human beings, and there's still a chance that in a quieter moment you can find common ground or at least more of a middle ground, right? Like that's important. But
Yep.
if you don't start off with being angry, then maybe change doesn't happen. So that's maybe so there's a little bit of that conversation too. Is the colic and whatever's behind that door, they're not going to fight fair.
No.
And so maybe, every once in a while we do know a good superhero, say the Phoenix. Every once in a while, Jean Grey just goes ham. And everybody's like, oh, we better put everything down now, right? Because like Jean Grey's about to destroy the universe. We should stop fighting. That would be a problem.
Brilliant. And all this on what is supposedly a young adult book.
Yes, yes, yeah. I mean, well, again, like I do feel like any good storytelling works on a bunch of levels. So yeah,
Perfect.
don't be afraid. If you think your 11-year, 12-year-old is not ready for the deep political fights of our day, that's okay. This book is not going to immediately drag them into it.
Well, as we said, you've been exceptionally generous with your time. It's been great catching up with you. Great chatting everything the last witch. Just obviously, if you want to finish off, just let people know where they can find you, where's best to follow your work. What have you got coming up for people to keep an eye out for?
Sure, for sure. I mean, probably the best place. I'm not as busy on social media as I should be, but I do have an Instagram, which is the real Connor with one N. I'm also on Twitter, which I will not call X.
Will
Conor
always be
McCreery.
called Twitter.
It's always
Always.
Twitter. So that's Conor McCreery as well. There's a Facebook page for me and for Kill Shakespeare. You can also there is some more Kill Shakespeare coming out. So if somebody here's an old
Oh,
Kill
cool.
Shakespeare fan, you can listen to or follow us on Twitter there as well. And the Kill Shakespeare website, I'm building my own, but it's not there yet. But yeah, the Kill Shakespeare website's out there. And as far as what's coming next, I've got a graphic novel coming out this October with HarperCollins. It's called Fela, Music is the Weapon. And very quickly, it's about the famous Nigerian activist artist Fela Kuti. And if you don't know Fela, that's totally cool. Think of him as the African Bob Marley. If Bob Marley had put out 55 plus records, married 28 women, 27 in one day, was arrested over 200 times, and started his own country. It's very much a sex, drugs, and rock and roll fueled journey through this guy, Fela, who lived just an incredible, very interesting life. You can check out Fela, the graphic novel. It's got our website there. Pre-orders are available there. And if it looks interesting to you, I would say pre-order because, as I just learned, which I never knew, that when you pre-order a book, the booksellers know then to put it on a better shelf. It's not like comics where like Alan's going to just be like, oh, this is interesting, I'm going to put it here. In the book market, it is really driven by those pre-orders. So if you know about Fela or you find this interesting, you'll help us twice. Once by getting the book, and once by helping somebody else realize that it exists, because it won't be filed away in the bottom corner of some dusty part of the store. So yeah, those are the two major things coming out. Some more stuff coming out in 2026, but hopefully we will have a chance to chat, before another 120 something episodes go by, and we can talk about those things in their due course. But yeah, guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys ask really interesting questions, and I just really appreciate getting to talk with you guys. You guys
Yeah.
are really good at this. So, yeah.
It's been great having you back, Connor. Absolutely brilliant having you back. And we will look forward to hopefully seeing you in store at some point in the next
Yes,
you know.
100%. 100%. It is not, Ryanair and EasyJet they're just down the street.
Perfect. Listen, thank you so, so much. Great talking to
Yeah,
you.
it's been an absolute
Thanks,
pleasure.
guys.